this video, we're going to review how we can import unbalanced hierarchies. So to do that, I'll access my import menu as I typically would from the Get Data screen, and I'll choose to import dimensions. So we do need to import an unbalanced hierarchy separate from data, so as a discrete import of a dimension. So the import that I'm going to do here, I'm going to name for the dimension that I want to create here. That'll make it easy for me to remember later. And I'm going to browse out to the file that I'm going to use to import this. In this case, the import I'm doing is of a chart of accounts, one of the many types of hierarchies that I would find that are unbalanced. By unbalanced, of course, what we mean is that they terminate at different levels. So for example, total revenue does not stop at level 3 as our operating expenses does. It stops at the root level. Let's do a quick chalkboard example though, so that you can see exactly what we're talking about here. So first, a balanced hierarchy. Now these are actually less common in my experience, but one you'll probably be very familiar with: time. So we always think of time in days, weeks, months, years, and very often quarters as well. But each one of those levels are balanced. So every month has days. It may have a different number of days, that's irrelevant, but they all have days. When you think about a dimension like your organization, though, your organizational hierarchy, it'd be very unlikely to find that balanced. Typically, a CEO, CFO, whoever will have an administrative assistant who doesn't have 7 levels of reports under them. In fact, they're the termination of that branch. They're the last level of that branch, while other members directly under that CEO will have many levels of management hierarchy beneath them. So now let's get back to importing this one and see what that looks like. Next, I'll click Advanced, and then I'll clear the mappings that we have now, because currently we're looking at this as if it were 3 separate dimensions. I'm just going to do 1. So I'll set my first item as a dimension, then I'll show the properties of that, and here I'll start to make some adjustments. For example, I'll remove the level 1 indicator here and just call this dimension Gap IS Accounts. And then I'll proceed to add other levels. So I'll add my level 2 and level 3. Now we know not all of these levels are fully populated because this is an unbalanced hierarchy. I'll click at the dimension level and I'll choose that I have unbalanced source data, so that we know that there may be data missing at various levels. In addition, I will choose not to create a total element in this hierarchy, as it is already of the exact structure that I want to use. I don't need to add a total to this. You'll see from some of the other options here that I could convert this to a balanced hierarchy. So if I wanted to, I could have total revenue replicated at every level and expand to the same depth as these other members. That's not what I want to do in this case. I'll simply click Finish, and then we'll take a look at what we've imported. You'll see here, of course, my import process named for the dimension as I added in the beginning, and then our dimension. Let's look at this dimension and see how it's constructed. So you'll remember that total revenue had no children, nor did cost of revenue, but gross profit was net of our total operating expenses, which does expand out further. Similarly, our operating income or loss also expanded to include further children, but net income and preferred stock and net income applicable to common shares all were at the root level, so we've imported those as such. Now I can use this hierarchy in any cube that I want to create and populate with data. In the previous example, we're looking at a file that was constructed with columns for levels, and we could infer the unbalanced nature of the hierarchy that we were importing because certain items didn't have other levels, so we could see just based on that. It's very common to get that sort of file structure from a data warehouse or many enterprise systems. But there's another file type that we could be importing, another way to import what is almost always an unbalanced hierarchy. I'm going to do that the same way we did our previous unbalanced hierarchy, by importing dimensions. So we can't do this sort of import at the same time we're importing data. We have to do these separately. So I'll browse out to my file. This is another type of hierarchy as well that's almost always unbalanced. So our employees dimension here. And this file has two simple columns here for an employee and their manager. Now we know that those relationships between employee and manager, between these two columns, can be recursive. So here we have someone who's got a manager, Hugo, but Hugo will also have a manager if I'm able to find him down here somewhere. Hugo will also have a manager. So we get this sort of recursive hierarchy that builds up. So yeah, see, here we can see that Hugo has a manager, Victoria, and so on. Now these are very often unbalanced. We have a special approach to importing those. Click Advanced, and we'll clear our mappings, and we'll create our employees dimension. So here, as previous, I'll give this a name. I'll just adjust this to call it employees. We've got a level for employee here, but we don't actually want to create levels in this import. We just want to recognize the relationships that exist between the employee column and the manager column. We don't actually know how many levels will be present in this file. So to do that, I'll just change my import type here to parent-child. When I do this, you'll notice that our named levels option disappears. That's because we can't really create named levels when we don't know how many levels there's going to be. We could name them later, but up front, defining the import, we don't know. Again, I'm going to remove my total element here, as I don't need that. And I'm just going to move things around. So we'll say employee here. This column represents the child, and my manager column represents the parent. And that's going to help us determine how to recurse that relationship to see how many levels we have. So I'll click Summary here. This is going to be a new dimension, and then Finish. And we'll take a look at what this dimension looks like. So if we open our employees dimension, we'll see again this is highly unbalanced. So we've got our top level here is Wendy Ward with Nancy Gibson reporting to her, and then a number of other employees who are clearly managers as well, of other folks, some of whom have further reports further down the chain. So that's another approach that I can very easily build an unbalanced hierarchy. If my source file has two columns, and only two columns, representing parent and child, we can iterate through those two columns to build up a full hierarchy based on the relationships described there. So the last thing I want to show you before we leave this topic is what this process would look like in Performance Modeler. So the guided import, the portion that we just stepped through in Cognos Insight, is of course shared with Performance Modeler. I could use either to create this unbalanced hierarchy. The big difference, of course, is that Performance Modeler will then let me edit that script once I've created it. So we can step through here and see what it's doing and maybe make some modifications. So here we can see all our file definition, column definition, how we've mapped that. So just like we had done previously, with manager as our parent, employee as our child. But of course here I can also go to my advanced tab and look at the Turbo Integrator script that's been created. So we've got just a couple of parameters to determine how to run the process, whether or not we want to destroy and recreate the dimension or not. Some setup in the prologue, how we create or destroy the dimension, what attributes it needs, and that sort of thing. And you can edit these if you need to, but the one that I'll be interested in here, and what's core to doing this unbalanced hierarchy with the two-column file, is how we handle the columns. So for example, here we're doing an insert of our employees. If the manager is empty, so if that column has no value, or if it's the same as the employee, then we don't need to do anything. Otherwise, we do what the normal code would do, which is insert that employee with their manager and make sure that those roll-ups are defined here. Now what the guided import generated code is not testing for here, we could simply add. So for example, if I was worried about a condition where we actually have no employee listed, there's nothing in the employee column, I can just test that here with or employee equal nothing. Also do nothing. Now we could add any number of other conditions here or handling for them. So perhaps if a manager column had a value, if there was a value there, I want to create a manager, but they simply don't have any employees yet. I could add that here as a separate condition. So very easy to modify this generated code. So hopefully you see now that it's very easy to create an unbalanced hierarchy in TM1, whether you have a file structure that's level-based, like it was in our first example, or where you've got a parent-child relationship like we saw in our second file. Either are very easy to and quick to import, but they're also very flexible because we generate the code for you and you can then modify that to do anything you like and handle additional conditions or things that you want to test for or modify in the structure of your dimension. So if you want to give it a try yourself, there's a number of exercises you can play with. So have fun. Thanks for your time.